Welcome to the Diesel Podcast presented by DFC Diesel. Kory and Stewart, welcome to the Diesel Podcast. You guys are longtime veterans. I've had you guys on individually, but I thought it'd be great to bring you guys both together so we could cover the legal perspective of some of the emissions, DF stuff with trucks. And then Kory, I mean, you're right in the thick of it with your tuning company that you founded and working to make change happen. So welcome back. Look forward to chatting with you guys today.
Yes, great to be back.
Great to be back. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I think we should just start right off with you, Stewart. And I'm not sure how long ago it was, maybe a month or so ago. There was a big announcement by Lee Zeldin, the EPA, as far as with DEF fluid and the issue with trucks derating and it affecting trucks, equipment, farm equipment. Can you just give us a kind of a synopsis or a breakdown of what the EPA said about that?
Sure. I'll leave the technical aspects of this to Kory because he's the diesel truck engineer, whatever you want to call him. Sort of a genius with the tuning and the repair side. But I'll tell you what happened on the legal side. So on March 26th, the EPA issued guidance on DEF sensors specifically. It's called DEF quality monitoring using alternate sensor technology. And what this guidance seeks to address is quality problems and failures with what are called the UQS. Won't be the first time that I butcher that acronym. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But the UQS are the urea quality sensors, and they are famously unreliable for diesel vehicles because they can't actually accurately or consistently or both determine what the quality of the urea is that's actually going into the SCR system. And the EPA is attempting to address the concerns with this sensor, which causes repeated failures for diesels of all types, ag equipment, big trucks, over-the-road trucks, normal light, heavy-duty applications. What this guidance seeks to do is it seeks to eliminate the requirement that UQS are mandated on vehicles, mandated to be used on vehicles to be operational. Because when a UQS sensor fails, what happens is that it derates the vehicle, and then whoever is driving that vehicle is stuck doing whatever they're doing, whether they're driving to school or operating in a field with big ag equipment, or they're on a long haul truck, trip, whatever. So the EPA has issued guidance. It's not a law that says that they have a concern about the UQS system and that they are seeking to initiate a formal rulemaking session where a UQS sensors are no longer required on vehicles, meaning that they're going to be relying on and this is the other thing that I'm trying to find here, the NOx sensors instead. So you have your NOx sensors, which actually keep track of the NOx that is emitted by diesel vehicles, and then you have the UQS. And they're saying the UQS does not work properly, and therefore we are not going to continue to mandate these. We're going to issue guidance saying there is a problem with these. So the way that it works legally is the EPA issues guidance on what they're going to do, and then they seek to create what's called a proposed rule. And I know a lot of times on the podcast, we've talked about formal rulemaking, informal rulemaking. The EPA is a governmental administrative agency, has the authority to create formal rules where they're interpreting the law. And in this case, the law, as we know, is the Clean Air Act. And when they are interpreting this specific requirement for the Clean Air Act, They want to make a rule that says that they are no longer going to mandate the UQS on diesel vehicles on the SCR systems because it's unreliable and it causes problems for people around the country, all over the place. The formal rule, which is closer to a law, it's not actually legislation that goes through Congress, but it's closer to a law, and generally it's treated as a law. That has not occurred yet. The EPA intends to issue a formal rule related to the UQS sensors soon. There's no defined timeline. But for now, the way that I interpret this guidance is, and I think that this is what Kory will talk about, is that if you remove or alter the UQS on your vehicle in order to make sure that your vehicle is performing and make sure that the SCR system is going to perform so that you're not stuck somewhere and you don't break down, then the EPA is not going to consider that to be a violation of the Clean Air Act, and they're not going to enforce on it.
Hey, Diesel fans, our friends over at Kershaw Knives have a 20% off code for you. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com and use code 20TD8FR26, you get 20% off your cart and free shipping over $50. So if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house, they've got you covered with a whole bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different opening mechanisms, different handle designs, and it's a great way to save some money and get some cool gear. Again, go to kershaw.kaiusa.com and use code 20TD8FR26 and get 20% off your cart and free shipping over $50. Kory, to kind of set the stage for you and your perspective on it, once that happened, I heard saw a lot on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok from people, probably millions of plays. It was like, all right, boys, we talked about it. We can delete DEF stuff now. You just rip that stuff off the truck. That's why I wanted to bring you guys together to talk about what it actually means. So with what Stewart just laid out, your perspective as the founder of PPI, someone's involved in motorsports for a decade plus, what you do, what does it mean for someone who's got a diesel truck right now and they've just heard about this?
Well, we actually had a meeting with EPA and SBA and some others yesterday on this topic, and realistically, it means nothing. In the real world, it means nothing. On paper, it sounds really great. The OEM, and the reason is this, is because the urea quality sensor, while that may have been one of the top reported failure items, what they're going to do is they're basically going to create a model in the ECU, kind of like they did during COVID whenever they couldn't get sensors, if you recall that. And Cummins dealt with all that later on, right? But they create this model, but that model assumes that our NOx sensors are working properly and all the other things. And if we don't have a D-rate system in place, then the vehicle, while it might throw a code, if it has a NOx error, then it's going to turn back around. It's going to start dosing a ton of EGR back into the system. And the thing is this does not remove the diesel exhaust fluid. So the big complaint that I think EPA is starting to really understand, SBA definitely gets it, and I think EPA is starting to understand, is that people are not just looking to not have a problem on their vehicle, but also not pay the expensive fee for the diesel exhaust fluid that you put in your trucks. So if we have a quality sensor issue and that goes out, but we still have to put fluid in the truck, that's still a problem. We still have to pay for fluid, and that assumes that no other system has failed on the vehicle. So in reality, where it says, well, most of these failures are the UQS sensor. Okay, that's fine, but at the same time, if that's 90%, if that's a 90% failure item on the DEF system, so to speak, but we have an 88% failure item right behind it, that's going to contradict the UQS trick, the model that they're doing. You're kind of getting nowhere. And the big thing is there's no guidance. So we reached out to EPA. We're waiting on them to get back with us. We sent quite a few responses, and we got one back. And it was basically saying that we don't have an answer for you for how the aftermarket industry can play into this. But we're working on it, and we'll get back with you soon. And so as far as tuning and aftermarket industry, what has been done and what can we do? I have it from the horse's mouth of the EPA. You can do nothing. Now, on the agriculture side of things, you notice where they said that you can use any tool, any system to basically override and temporarily disable these systems so that way they can still work. The key word in there was they said any tools, and it's a temporary override. Now, what people do and will they install it back on later? I'm not really sure, but that is not the same provision we're working with right now on the mobile source side of things, because they're just saying we're going to create a new model for the UQS, and then the OEMs would be able to update it. But still, there's no OEMs that's updated it. This stuff has to get really, really tight and before even OEMs jump onto it, because like Stewart said before, the next administration comes in, undoes this. This is way too much R&D and everything for them to be able to just get undone. So something is, and I think and I've got to give the administration a ton of credit. I mean, they're actually talking to people out in the field, like, it's like Stewart, like us. We never had a voice before, where now they're doing things and they can get feedback, and we were able to give them feedback as to what the public perception is, what the temperature in the room is, and then possible ways of going forward. One thing for sure is that the administration wants to tackle the whole after treatment issue. It's just, how do you get there, and how can you unravel things in such a way that gives people a little bit of relief? Not having the vehicles go into derate and actually getting that activated, even with after treatment still there, is a really good thing, because someone's going to the hospital and their truck would potentially derate out, and it didn't. Well, the exhaust may be stuffed as a potato and the level sensor stuck on the DEF sensor, but if it's not derating, at least you can get someone to safety. So I think it's a really big deal, the steps that they're going. And it's not like, and Stewart could talk to this, it's not like they have a switch that they could just say, okay, this is all legal now. Like, they would just be met with lawsuits, and that would be the saga for the next 4 years. So there's a system that they have to go through to be able to unravel these things that don't make sense. But one thing that came up yesterday that I think is really important was, the whole endangerment finding things coming to a head. And what is that, Stewart? By Monday or Tuesday next week? So on the 20th, is it? So my anniversary. Imagine that, 420. But yeah, being able once we can establish, like, the endangerment finding, that's for greenhouse gases, which doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the criteria pollutants. But what is very important is the way that the endangerment finding came about. The history of it was a bunch of nonsense. We just connected the dots that the nonsense for this criteria pollutant ordeal isn't too terribly far from the same source. So when someone asks, what can we do? Can we delete a vehicle right now? Can we remove the emissions and meet current standards? The answer is no. And the reason for that is because the OEMs aren't even able to actually obtain the current standards. And whenever they were going to the new standards that thankfully this administration got rid of, the manufacturers basically said, well, we can't meet that, so we're going all electric. So we're literally at the benchmark of where they were going to be before they had to go electric, because we can't even achieve it anymore. And the reality is the benchmark of emissions right now, the current tier, is too high for the manufacturers to hit. So we have to go back to something a little bit more reasonable. The reasonable thing on that, in my opinion, is what we're sending out to other countries and the military already. The manufacturers already have that protocol. They already have that standard done. It's not like it has no emission system in the calibration. The calibration's even done in a way that it would meet emissions to 2007 levels or earlier. But the vehicle's so clean on modern technology that it's actually surpassing 2012 standards, where the vehicles were in 2012. And that's with a modern vehicle without after treatment. And it's also convenient because they pass smog testing. So you'd be able to go to your local place, get smog. None of us want a dirty vehicle or smelly vehicle on the road. So it'll pass smog and everything without emissions, even on a current vehicle. You just won't pass the readiness monitors. So that's something the administration would have to look at. But I think in the grand scheme of things, if we could go back, you gotta get smog tested, get your inspection sticker. If you pass smog, press go. Don't pay $6,000 for DPF.
Yeah, just to piggyback on something you said, I think it's really important that the current administration and the EPA are not treating the aftermarket as the enemy. That's what's been happening for the last, ever since 2010 or whatever you want to call it. The many of the consent decrees that we did early on, and I know that this is something that Kory's had to deal with directly. They don't want you to even be able to touch or modify the OBD, which is ridiculous. That it is, I mean, you can go out and you can buy a tuner for a gas vehicle. You can go out and you can buy a chip for, pretty much any vehicle on the road. And a lot of the issues that we were facing with the EPA over the course of that decade, the 2010 decade, really had to do with them treating the aftermarket as a whole like it was the enemy. And instead of working with the aftermarket, which is full of really brilliant engineers and really brilliant, people who work on these vehicles hands-on, you're listening to what EPA environmental engineers are saying about, the emission standards and particulate matter and NOx and everything else, right? So by engaging in a dialogue with the aftermarket with people like Kory, I think that the EPA, I don't see that changing too much, even if there is a new administration coming through, because this administration and even a lot of the EPA employees that I've been working with, they see a lot of value in working with the aftermarket in a productive way and not just putting these blanket prohibitions down where you're not allowed to replace an exhaust. You must use OEM catalytic converters, for example, in Colorado. They have to be OEM. Well, my wife had a Land Cruiser, 2006 Land Cruiser. We went to replace the catalytic converters. It has two of them, $5,600. You can buy aftermarket ones that work great for $1,000 a piece. So, not treating the aftermarket in general like the enemy and working hand in hand with the aftermarket to try to get some positive movement on after treatment systems, emission systems, EGR systems, I think is a big step that will be embraced by future administrations.
Yeah, I completely agree with Stewart. And that's what I was saying earlier, where, we're actually having conversations, us and some other engineers, and we're having real conversations. And it's not for the first time ever. We're not, EPA and DOJ is not just trying to attack us. They're like, in your expertise, in your field, what is it that you see? What are a lot of calls you get? What are a lot of failure points? Do you think that technology could be updated to meet current standards? If not, what standards could it meet? So you're seeing this vast array from the administration basically saying, hey, we want to help figure things out. But obviously, look at, as Stu knows, look how far back and how deeply entrenched this all is. That's why none of us, we had a lot of faith, but, really, could we even get to where we are right now? I'm honestly surprised. We're moving forward. This administration's moving forward. And them being able to talk to actual people in the field, like when you see when like Trump issues an EO and you see a lot of those random people standing by him and everything, that's people that's been working with the administration doing kind of like what me and Stu's been doing nonstop with them to try to hammer this through, get direction, get proper language, and ultimately just understanding of how things could work or how things should work. Where before you're pretty much left on red with a broad interpretation, and that's what allowed people to get in such high water.
It's really interesting is like the idea for this conversation. I was chatting with Stewart because I'm not even a novice at this. Most of what I learn is from either following you on social media, Kory, or the podcast we've done, or with you, Stewart. And I just saw this influx of content, and I think as diesel enthusiasts or people who have diesel trucks, we ultimately want to buy a 2026 truck that's like a 2003 5.9 or an LB7 or a 7.3 Power Stroke, right? That's ultimately what they want.
Yeah.
So you have this enthusiasm, but then I'm talking with Stewart and he's like, not much has really changed. Like, what are we going to talk about here? And he brought up something that I want to relate back is he said, with this sensor, if it's not reading the quality of the DF fluid, you've got to make up for it in other parts of the system, whether that's EGR or something else. But I'm not an expert in that. Maybe we can have Kory on. So I wanted to talk with you a bit about that, Kory, because I think the first thing someone's going to think is, okay, I'm not going to get derated by my DF sensor, but in order for the OEMs to meet this standard, what's going to happen with my EGR? Does it get more aggressive? Do my regens increase? Like, that's what the end user is probably going to be thinking and wondering about.
Yeah, so theoretically, nothing should change because nothing changed on the DEF system, how it functions, how much it doses, when it doses, everything remains the same. All they're basically trying to do is say, we're not going to have this sensor measuring the quality. Instead, we're going to make an assumption on the quality based on the feedback of other sensors. And then everything else stays normal operation. So theoretically, which the OEMs haven't developed a calibration for this yet. So this is theory, right? But the theory of how that would work would be the system operates as normal. Everything's good. If the NOx sensors or something starts giving it feedback that indicate that there may be a quality issue on the DEF fluid, then it would still actually throw a check engine light. It would get pissed off, but it should give you an extended time frame before it actually leaves you on the side of the road instead of just saying, hey, you're screwed in just a few minutes, right? And so that's where it's currently at. And it's a step in the right direction because they're coming out and saying we recognize there's a problem, and I really think that they're just now starting to really understand the whole thing's a problem. Yesterday, I gave an example of like a boot coming. Like this is a very common thing. Everyone's seen it before in the industry or involved in a vehicle. Driving down the road, your vehicle's 10 years old. It's a great day, and then you hear just like sound, right? A little boost leak. Your 10-year-old boot on the turbo to the intercooler. Maybe that has a small leak in it. Well, by the time you pull over at the gas station, a check engine light came on, the DPF is filled up with soot. So you would try to get it cleaned. If you can't get it cleaned out, now it's a $4,000 to $6,000 DPF replacement. So explaining these situations to the government, it's like the DPF and the emission systems actually work pretty well. It's normally not of a fault of their own that they go out.
Yeah.
The fault actually relies on mechanical systems break sometimes. And if a boot comes off, you're driving down the road and you've got a basic emissions component on it, that's not going to cost you anything besides a $10 boot replacement. But now that you had a boot come off, it just costed you a $6,000 exhaust system that might be 3 months back ordered, and now your truck can't run. So, and another thing as well that we tried to demonstrate through was these pipes, when they stop up, it's like putting a potato in the exhaust. You can get air in through the intake, but if you can't move air out of the engine, it's like taking a straw and just stopping the end up. You can blow as hard as you want, but nothing's going to happen. So,
well, something might happen.
Yeah. You got 100
right?
pounds.
I mean, like everything in between the intake and the exhaust might fail.
Yeah. You go from having, say, if you've got 20 pounds of boost, maybe only 25 pounds of back pressure. Now you got 20 pounds of boost and 100 pounds of back pressure.
Yeah.
So the heads, everything, but the weakest point is where the pressure is going to want to go. So that's how a lot of those problems come about, rather than be the heads or whatever. So so many other issues, but it's like when the manufacturers come out and say, well, the exhaust, like the emission systems themselves are pretty good. In a perfect world, they actually aren't that bad. But unfortunately, as vehicles get older and even brand new ones, the world's not perfect. And I've had a brand new vehicle pop a boot from the manufacturer simply because they didn't have it all the way torqued to spec, or it had a little bit too much oil inside the boot whenever they were doing it. Like life happens. And the thing is when life happens, which it happens to everybody, we shouldn't have to pay a $4,000 to $6,000 penalty or have to wait 4 months of an inoperable vehicle to then pay the penalty. So these are the things I think the administration is really starting to take into account.
Well, and there is some merit to, there's a lot of merit to that argument, and that's a really good way to put it, because there's a lot of protection that consumers have with regard to warranty issues, right? There is not protection that consumers have with regard to what we call consequential damages. And consequential damages are just what they sound like. They're damages that occur as a result of a failure of whatever it may be. Okay. So say that your boot comes off, it results in a catastrophic emissions component failure, whether it's a DPF or whatever, or a catastrophic drivetrain failure, transmission, engine, whatever. You may have warranty coverage for that. But what you don't have is coverage for all of the expenses and the associated costs related to what happens after that. What if you need to rent a car? What if you don't? What if you have, the general insurance or some other, subpar insurance company because that's all you can afford, right? Those insurance companies are not going to be covering the other expenses that are related to, or if you have a business and you're relying on that truck, which most of our clients and most of the people that I know, they're relying on a diesel for business. There's only a few people out there who, they like to spend 120 grand on a truck because it's a really sweet truck, right? But most people are relying on and you don't get lost productivity time as part of a warranty repair. You don't get lost wages as a warranty repair. You don't get all of those consequential damages as part of a warranty repair are not going to be covered either unless you have supplemental insurance, which costs a lot of money, or you have some kind of a business E&O policy, right? And those are really expensive. So in this day and age where people are really looking at saving money, cutting their costs, it is really important to think about what an OEM might do in order to protect a consumer from these types of warranty failures. Like Kory says, the emission systems, especially nowadays, they're pretty good. You're not going to run into too many pattern failures of an emission system that's been on the road for anywhere between 15 and 20 years, right? But or it's been designed for that long and improved upon for that long. What you are going to run into are other issues related to downtime that have to do specifically with consequential damages. And those are not going to be covered by warranty. And those are not going to be covered by people, honestly, who don't have the money to be able to do all the preemptive maintenance or all the preventative maintenance that you might have to do on a work vehicle.
Yeah, and I imagine Stu can see similar trends, like you'll see the low income and lower middle income, at least from our customer base, those guys, when they actually were deleting the trucks, they were deleting them because they couldn't afford anything else. Like that's what they had to resort to. And then you take your upper middle income, and then upper income. Those guys are the guys that would generally delete it in advance, so that way they never had the problem. So I see it from the lowest income range to the highest. This guy gets hurt and has to. This guy does it so he doesn't get hurt. It's just the traditional thing.
That's exactly right. With the criminal practice, which thank God is not there anymore, at least on the diesel side. On the criminal practice, I would say at least 75% of my sentencing arguments had to do with the cost of deleting versus the cost of replacement. And I had people who were being convicted of felony. They had felony convictions for 11 vehicles, 17 vehicles, 9 vehicles in a fleet. And they're like, I would have replaced the DPF if I could get my hands on it, or I would have replaced the DPF if I could afford it.
Yep.
They're deleting because it is the cheapest, easiest way to keep their aging fleet operational. And that is something that you make an argument to a court. And actually, the federal judges were very sympathetic and receptive to that argument. They're like, okay, well, that makes sense, actually. So that's something that happened. You're right. I've got a lot of experience with that. And I think that what you're saying is spot on.
Is that the change that you guys have both seen? Is the reception to the EPA or DOJ or just the government in general of understanding or talking to you guys and understanding this isn't just I want to blow black coal and make YouTube videos and get likes on it. This is actually a financial burden.
Depends who it is. It depends where they are. It depends on what their frankly, what state they're in. Okay. So I've got cases in certain red states, blue collar states, even blue states that have like a large population of blue collar workers. And like I write an email to a prosecutor or a judge and I say, hey, we want you to hold off on collecting this penalty because the law has changed or the interpretation of the law has changed. And a lot of times they will be really receptive to it. A big issue that's happening in the EPA and the government right now is you have pockets of resistance in the EPA and the DOJ of people who do not want to follow what this administration is doing. And those people are, I mean, it's almost like insubordination or a mutiny where people are saying, I'm not going to do that. I don't care what the Trump administration wants me to do. I'm not going to do that because that's not environmentally conscious, or that's not why the EPA is here, or whatever it is. Or DOJ employees, and they're like, no, we already got our conviction. We're not going to look at it again. And so we, meaning myself and my colleagues and people like Kory who are going to Washington, we're going over their head. And we're going to the White House directly, and we're going to senators and Congress people directly, and we're going to senior DOJ employees directly, and we're saying, hey, we're basically tattling on them.
Yes.
And saying so-and-so in this jurisdiction is not following your directive. What are you going to do about it? And then they write an email or they make a phone call, and then all of a sudden, a week later, you get an email, oh, we changed our mind. So there is a significant resistance within the government to the Trump administration's priorities. Maybe these people are expecting that there's going to be a Democratic administration soon. I don't know. Maybe they really are taking their own opinion of a moral high ground on it. But there is a lot of governmental resistance and infighting that we're seeing on a daily basis.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like I've kind of hinted like high level, but I'm like, it's a massive war behind the scenes. And like, it's exactly what Stu's talking about. It's nasty. This is like Stu's world with all that. I'm like, I walk in and I'm like, oh, people just want data.
In that position. Look, I'm not personally an especially conservative person. Like I'm not liberal, but I'm not an especially conservative guy. Okay. I live in Boulder. There's a lot of liberals here. I live in Colorado. There's a lot of liberals here. This is kind of my world here. But I'll tell you what, my dad worked for the government for 35 years, and he worked through several administrations. He worked through Reagan. He worked through Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, and at the end, Obama. And he never, ever revolted or infought with regard to what an administration wanted to do. It was his job he was a regional administrator for the U.S. Forest Service. It was his job to administer the agency the way that the government, the presidential administration wanted it done. Okay, that was his job. It wasn't his job to say, no, we're not going to do this and we're not going to do that. If you don't want that job, you can quit, right? And it is a massive war behind the scenes between people who just don't want to do what the Trump administration wants for them to do. And people like me and Kory and some of the other close colleagues we have are right on the front line of trying to find the right person to talk to about so-and-so in Texas or so-and-so in Florida or so-and-so in California, people who just aren't doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I want to take that just a little bit farther and ask you guys a question with that. Is we're, a little over a year into this administration, and time goes by fast. And I think both of you in the podcasts that I've done have talked about the changes over the years with enforcement, like with you, Stewart, some of the things that have happened, Kory, as that's evolved. Is there enough time left before late 2027, 2028, to be able to progress this particular part of emissions to a better point? Like, it just seems like there might not be enough time to be able to get all this stuff done in the next 2.5 years as it relates to emissions.
I'm optimistic. We're having conversations that are dang near getting to be like bi-weekly. And with seeing how aggressive, and now the big thing is for me, Stu may have a different opinion, but for me, the way that I see it is like, what is your aggressiveness on the topic? Are you getting hits? Is it a hot topic? Because if it's a hot topic that gets hits, then you'll see it become a campaign thing in the long run. We've got a lot of really good indicators on that. And then there hasn't been an influencer team necessarily come out with necessary messaging. To be honest, we're getting that messaging figured out now. But once we have the messaging necessary and we get the proper influencers with the right messaging and understand there's a pathway, and you start getting 100 million views a day, rapidly you'll see things change. And I think that would be the codifier that the administration would need. From a legal perspective, Stu could speak on that a little better, but seeing the optimism, the amount of questions they're asking, and feedback that they're taking in, and seeing more and different people involved in a lot of these meetings. And likewise, whenever, like Stu was saying, if EPA is not doing something right, and we get with SBA, and then SBA asks EPA what's going on, there's like what's the word I'm looking for? There's accountability between the administration, and this one will hold this one accountable. This one will hold this one accountable. We've never seen that before, but like I'll get a text message with a follow-up of like, hey, has anything gotten better in this regard? So with seeing how aggressive they are to wanting to fix the problem, want to understand the problem, while still protecting the environment, obviously, and protecting everything, I'm extremely hopeful. And I'm going to continue to invest this time and energy into it because I really think it can happen. If I put a percentage on it, I'm north of 75.
So I generally agree with that. And I might have a little different perspective, but I think it's just with regard to my job. So I think, and this is my personal opinion, this is not something that anybody with the EPA has shared with me. I think that the EPA and the DOJ knows that they went too far. Okay. And holding environmental criminals liable, having these felonies, holding them liable for these huge penalties or these small penalties, and even taking their rights away with, felony convictions. I think that even the more left-leaning people that I've talked to agree that the EPA and the DOJ went too far in the 2020 to 2024 timeframe, and that even if, we're really talking about a year, right? Because it's not 2 years, because if the Democrats win the House back in November, which traditionally happens regardless of what the politics are, right? The incumbent president usually loses the House in his first 2 years. I still don't think that there's going to be a big move with Democrats to try to go back to where they were, because I think that they realized how much that they were hurting normal, hardworking Americans. And the Democrats lost the recent elections, not to get too political about this, because they were not paying attention to what was happening with normal people, normal blue-collar Americans who wanted to work for a living, and they just want the government off their ass. Right? So when I talk to people in the EPA, I usually am having a conversation about, first of all, most of the people that I was working with in the EPA are gone. They're not working there anymore because they either took the government buyout, the Doge buyout, which happened last year, or they don't agree with the direction of the agency, and so they've moved on to a different job, right? But the people that I am talking about, I'm really getting the perspective with the DOJ and the EPA that they think that these criminal cases were not worth prosecuting in the first place, and that they're not really interested in this heavy-handed enforcement anymore because the amount of work and energy it took up for them. Okay. So what I've seen is that this sort of, very heavy-handed movement is migrating to the states. Washington State just created a new law with regard to environmental enforcement that has to do with criminal liability for Clean Air Act violations, the Washington Clean Air Act. Okay. And it has to do with tampering and it has to do with emissions. I don't know if it's passed their Congress yet, but it was a bill that was endorsed, and I think it's been moving through Congress. And look, if you want to live in a liberal state like California or Colorado or New York or Washington State, and you have potential criminal liability under a state legal theory for violating a state Clean Air Act, right? It's not ideal, but at least you have a choice, right? You can always move to Texas or Louisiana or Florida or wherever, right? And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about the prospects of future enforcement, because I think that there is a real regret in the agency and with government employees about how a large number of these cases were handled. And they're not going to come right out and admit that they were wrong, but you do see them backing off a lot of these really extreme policies that we've seen in the past. And I think that that's going to stick around. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's solid. I agree with all that.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it, with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increase power, increase torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. Hey, diesel fans, I wanted to chat with you about diesel fuel. It's something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, and specifically ways that it can lead to a lot of costly repairs. And the main reason that we have these issues is a lack of lubricity. Our friends over at Hot Shot Secrets have developed a formula that boosts performance and then addresses this issue. So whether you have an old truck, new one, something anywhere in between, we all face this issue. Hot Shots EDT is a 6-in-1 formula. It cleans injectors, boosts cetane, and it has 4 times the lubricity as their leading competitor. So it's a great way to be able to stay ahead of the maintenance curve, avoid those costly repairs. And the best part is it does the work for you. So all you do is add it to your regular fuel up schedule, and it's doing all the heavy lifting. So you don't have to worry about some of those issues that just come with diesel fuel anytime we buy it from the pump. If you go to hotshotsecret.com, use code DIESELPOD20. It'll get you 20% off your order. We really appreciate the team and our friends over at Hot Shot Secret offering this discount code just for you guys. So if you're in the market, head on over to their website, use code DIESELPOD20, and get 20% off your order. I think one of the big things maybe to pay attention to off what you just said, Stuart, is in the future it's shifting to the state level, which it does with other sorts of laws and
Constraints.
items. Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be vastly different between states and the federal government. I think I've done about 850 episodes of these, and I've loved doing all of them except for a handful. And the ones that I hated doing and would stress out about would be where I have a guy on talking about how he got a felony and how he went to prison or was going to prison, or to see the look on his wife's face as basically their family crumbles, or what it was like for their kids to be away from them. And I hated doing those episodes, but I felt people needed to see that and needed to hear it. So I think the progress that we talked about before, Stuart, with the change from criminal to civil, and some of the things that have happened have really been encouraging.
Yes.
Well, I think both sides have to move to the middle, right? I think if the Trump administration decides that they're going to pass legislation to make deletes legal, and that were somehow to get through Congress, that I think that would make a lot of people happy, right? But it would also provoke a reaction from a Democrat administration in the future. And I think Kory's talking about, and I really agree with this, and I really value this perspective. Kory's talking about going to the people who are decision makers with OEM, with the government, with the aftermarket, and saying, here are the things that we can do in order to kind of make everyone happy. Like, not everybody's always going to be happy, right? But like, we can meet these emission standards, we can meet these legal requirements, we can do all these things and also not compromise the quality of a vehicle or the reliability of a vehicle. Kory, as an advocate for the industry, is willing to go to the middle instead of beating on his drum, delete should be legal, delete should be legal. And I think that liberals or people with the EPA or Democrats or even environmentalists should take note of that, because I think that that's a big step in actually getting a functioning policy that works.
Yeah, I agree. And here's a big kicker that's not being discussed, but I do think that it will be a topic soon. I've discussed it with Stewart some. But the way that these systems are being measured is wrong. So as wild as this sounds, having after treatment in the field is worse for the environment than not having after treatment in the field. And the reason that doesn't display whenever people discuss it is because the EPA, now NASA, they measure what's called basically LCA. It's cradle to the grave. So if a rocket goes up and let's say a redesign of the rocket could take emissions down by 2% each flight, then that would be considered a good thing, right? But if you factor in that the changes in manufacturing and disposal, et cetera, of gaining 2% of less emissions on the rocket going up, if all that manufacturing process would increase it by 20 or 30%, well, then that 2%'s been washed out. You actually, in the effort of doing good, the reality is you did bad because you did more environmental harm over here in creating the systems and maintaining the system than you would have actually with it refined. And then when you factor it into the real world, and we're talking about the engines have a 50% less lifespan than what they generally have because the oil gets diluted, EGR, et cetera, all well documented. Now someone has to go buy a whole new vehicle and start over. And the argument of EPA would have been correct. The dirty vehicles off the road and the new clean vehicles on the road. But realistically, the cycle had just restarted and we never factored in any of the manufacturing costs, the transport from the ships, the rare earth material extraction from other countries that have, 8-year-olds doing this work, et cetera, et cetera. The second part of that is China has a lot of components in our exhaust systems. So to be a well-regulated militia, right, we can't even really fulfill our constitutional duties in total if a country that we got in a war with ended up taking and stopping these systems, we can't legally replace it. Now the citizens of their own country are stopped in their tracks. And we say, for what? For a system that's supposed to be this much cleaner, it's not that much cleaner. But the way the EPA's laws are written, Stewart might correct me here, I might butcher this, so bear with me. But the way it's written is basically EPA can't take into account the LCA, the cradle to the grave. So like the manufacturing costs, the maintenance fees, the shipping. They can't address that. But what they do have to address is if it harms the public by any percentage number, then they have to take action against it. So if we say that soot and NOx and hydrocarbons, everything else are harming humans, then it would be the EPA's responsibility to reduce that. And if they reduce that, but they're unwilling to be,
they're picking and choosing, right?
Yes,
like,
yes.
By law, not to interrupt you, but just to
Yes.
put a fine point on what you're saying right now, you could pick clean air, right? You're picking clean air, and then you're going to get all these enforcement actions related to clean air, and all these requirements, and all these formal rules, and all this guidance related to clean air. But if you're not taking the full global impact into consideration,
Correct,
then it's not actually cleaner, right? And that I want to let you finish your thought, but I really wanted to make that point, is that the EPA is picking and choosing the arenas and the areas in which they're focused their enforcement, because that's what the law provides. And they're not necessarily thinking about it in a global fashion, like you're saying.
exactly. And I think Lee Zeldin came out and addressed it pretty clear too. He said the agency traditionally says, well, no one said we can't do that, so that means we can do that. So they've taken that roadmap. But like a DPF, for example, its number one function is to reduce ash, to reduce soot output. The EPA likes to call it PM 2.5. So if we look at a vehicle and say, well, how much PM 2.5 comes out of it? They can give you this, tons and tons and this and that, make it sound terrible. But what they aren't saying is just the wildfire from Canada in 2023, since Henry Ford made the first vehicle, all combined emissions, all the way up to our clean standard vehicles, that one wildfire offset all vehicle emissions by 1,200 years. So in the grand scheme of things, are we actually making an impact? Is this doing anything? Well, a lot of my friends that are a little older, they come from the 70s. They're like, well, we seen smog and everything else, and we don't want that again. We fixed that. I totally agree. There was probably smog before there was computers. So modern technology, all the things people are scared of, the modern engines take care of all of that. They're already clean enough. With no emissions, they're plenty clean enough. They're great. The question is how far was too far? How far did the administration go? Was it 2020? Was it going to be 2027, 2035? We established 2035s off the table. 2027, they already they stalled that, didn't they, Stu? Mm-hmm. They stalled that. So the question is how far back do we actually need to go? And my answer to it, support it with data, is we need to go back to an area that we didn't have these maintenance systems that are designed to fail. They're very expensive, and we have to pay shipping and emissions penalties from all over the country, along with 2 to 4 miles per gallon fuel penalties per vehicle. So it's like, where's the balancing act? And I think that's where the administration's at. But from what they're doing, I think they're really starting to understand that they're making the environment worse by forcing the emission systems to be there, while all of our adversaries from Canada, or not adversaries, but people from Canada and Russia and China are still taking advantage of this system. When they came in at their heaviest hand of enforcement, right, which was the Biden era, that's the nastiest they've ever enforced. Post-enforcement, the leads went up 3x. So that means with 60% of the shops in America getting smashed, we allowed our other countries to get this into America and grow the problem 3x after nasty enforcement against Americans. So if even the most good-hearted environmentalists came out and said, well, we need to enforce harder, you made the problem 3 times worse, and you shut down the American companies. So I think we have to get more in a realistic terms of how can we do this balancing act and it work for everybody and make sense on paper as well.
Yeah, and I think that China's got a lot of problems, and they're not a model society. But one thing that they're doing is, in order to combat their pollution problem, they are building absolutely the world's best electric cars.
Yeah.
And before long, I don't know how long it's going to be, a decade, 2 decades, there's not going to be any gasoline vehicles in China. Not because you don't need them for anything, or not because they're not cheap or whatever, but because the electric vehicles are going to be so good and so cheap that they're just not going to need them anymore. And I'm not suggesting that this is the model that the US should use. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there's different ways to combat environmental problems. And just because the EPA had an idea of how to do it in 2008 or 2012 or 2020 when Biden was elected or whenever doesn't make it the right one. And you've got to have a wide breadth of interpretation of what impacts the environment in order to have a full picture. And if you don't have a full picture, you might temporarily improve the environment, but it's not going to work long term.
Nailed it. Nailed it.
Kory, you remember back in the day on like Duramax forum or Diesel Place or Cummins forum, like 15 years ago, people would be talking about that. Like they'd be talking about like the cost of DPFs and catalytic converters and all this stuff, and they would make a big deal about it. And I'm like, and I think that's the evolution of it, is for it to go from what end users were talking about in 2012, 2010 to now having these conversations at the highest levels. I think that's the growth that that people have wanted to see.
Yeah, yeah, and it's happening. And the thing is like when I tell people like this, a lot of the guys at the top, like they get it. They really do get it. You know, some of these guys are farmers and ranchers that are in this administration. They've had problems themselves. So before it was like I always had to try to sell that it was actually a problem. The biggest difference now is I'm not having to sell that it's a problem because they know it's a problem. It's more so looking for solutions and how can we remedy this. And from a technical and engineering perspective, what's realistic and what can be done. And we're being very honest and truthful on those fronts. And I'm not shooting to have the whole wild, wild west. I think that we need to have a standard. I don't want dirty. I don't want to be sitting at a red light and smelling people's nonsense. You know what I mean? Like nobody wants that. So there, like Stewart was saying, there has to be a middle ground here. There needs to be a legitimate standard. People should be able to meet the standard without spending $20,000 in emissions testing, in California or Detroit. You should be able to do reasonable basis emissions testing. Yeah, and I
mean,
can't talk
among the
about
most
it.
ridiculous things of the entire enforcement era was
It's
this
insane.
mandatory carb testing. Just absolutely the absolute pinnacle of government inefficiency. Like
That is what decimated us in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
It was that.
it's just unbelievable that that would even be a possibility, that you have to send your products to one lab in California that's backed up for 3 years, and you have to pay $20,000 to get one tune tested, and that one tune or that one exhaust or that one DPF system or that one injector or whatever it is can't be sold in the entire state of California, and then it must only apply for one specific engine group, even if you changed one bolt in one turbo. And it's not, I mean, just like it's a farce.
Yes.
It's a farce. It's a total parody of the idea of government overreach.
It is the high-speed rail of our industry.
Yeah. And that requirement alone, I mean, if you could get aftermarket tuning testing and aftermarket product testing done for a reasonable amount, or you could do it yourselves like the FDA does for all their drugs, right?
$7,500 bridge tool. Mustang sells a dyno to do our own testing. So it's like,
I know. And if you could do that yourself and you could sell products, it would just be, it would be so much better.
yes.
But instead you let, I hate the word bureaucrats because my dad was a bureaucrat, but he was not really a bureaucrat. He was one of the
good ones.
One of the most intelligent, thoughtful, conscientious people that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. I'm saying it because I lived with him for, I've known him my entire life.
Yeah.
But it is bureaucracy at its worst. And really, that's the part that I'm hoping doesn't go back to where it was, because there's just no reason for it. And the only thing it does is make people miserable and make them hate the government.
Yeah. Just like what they did, like I was saying earlier, The heaviest enforcement ever made the problem worse and made Americans miserable and put them in jail. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
This was a really, really good conversation. I loved having both you guys on and covering this topic. I had a couple questions I wanted to throw out before we wrap up from the audience. I thought these were good, and you guys have kind of touched on them during this conversation. I think the first one's kind of right down your lane, Stewart. But for shops that are openly advertising deletes already, what is the potential blowback if there's an administrative change in the future?
I've gotten probably 5 new civil enforcements in the last month and a half or 2 months. New enforcement agents, same exact thing that Kory was talking about on either on a podcast or maybe on social media about it being able to ruin your life. Do not underestimate the power of the civil division of the EPA. They may be wounded, but they are not, they're like a wounded animal. I mean, they're dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, frankly, look, if you're going to advertise deletes right now, you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you deserve to be enforced on, and you deserve to pay a big fat penalty.
Yep.
All the same rules still apply that we were talking about before, where you have the inability to pay provision and all that good stuff. And you don't really have to worry about, at least right now, the criminal side coming back. And I don't think that you're going to have to worry about that, at least for quite some time, unless something changes with the legislation. But if you're openly advertising deletes, the EPA will find you and they will sue you. And that's the reality of the situation. And the Trump administration, I've had lots of conversations with people in the Trump administration and the EPA, very high up, regional administrators, and they don't have any tolerance for that. They're like, we got to do something, right? And to be fair to the industry, or to be fair to the government with regard to the industry, in the early days when it was kind of like the Wild West, they had to do something, and that's when all the consent decrees started happening and all the RFIs started going out. So, yeah, there's still civil liability. There's no guarantee that criminal liability is going to go away forever. We believe it should under the current theory, but it would be just as easy for the EPA to make a formal rule or pass a law that says mobile source tampering is a felony. A specific law that says that, like they're doing on the state level, and get you in just as much trouble. So don't do it. Kory knows better than I do. At least I've made money from people deleting vehicles. Kory has not made money from people deleting vehicles, and he can tell you about the horror stories. They're not going away. I've gotten several new clients in the last couple months on civil side enforcement, so don't do it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with Stu on that. It's like we're working to change all this and get things fixed, and hopefully it happens. But the biggest deal is until that happens, the EPA still has a responsibility to uphold their duties. And that, unfortunately, is part of their duties. So if you're openly doing this and think it's the Wild Wild West just because we're hopeful on things changing, when it happens to you, don't cry about it. This is not a secret. We've been very public and open about this. And realistically, going out and blowing smoke and doing stupid stuff or acting like a rebel online, it does not help what we're doing whatsoever in the least bit. But again, a lot of that I'm seeing come from folks that are not even really in America too much and acting like they're in America. So again,
that's a good point.
it's our I say adversaries, but it's not necessarily adversaries, but it's every other country that's in America making it look flying American flags. We're your go-to shop here, American made, and it's just not. So if you see a ton of people online advertising and you think it's the Wild Wild West, that could be another country just doing it in this country. Do not get comfortable. I wouldn't do it. I flat out would not do it.
This next one kind of goes in line with that, and it might be right down your alley, Stewart. But someone asked, could enforcement on owners or the end user become a thing one day? Now, I wanted to switch it because I know we've talked about the EPA not doing it, but what about the states?
Enforcement on end users is just practically impossible from a resource perspective. And I hate to say that because I don't want to encourage people to buy or drive deleted vehicles unless they absolutely have to, which is it does happen in certain circumstances. Okay. Like if you're in certain areas of the country or you just don't have another option. End user liability is really hard to prove. Most people would say, hey, I just bought this vehicle, it was deleted, and then they might be able to find somebody at a dealership that sold it. But even under the most oppressive enforcement of the Biden administration, they were not conducting enforcement on end users. I've had a lot of shops ask me if they can work on deleted vehicles. I have advised my clients that it's my position that they are not going to get an enforcement action for that anymore because it's impossible not to work on deleted vehicles. And as long as they're not installing the deletes, they can do the work on the deleted vehicles. That used to be a big thing with the EPA that just never really went anywhere. But end user liability, is it ever going to be a problem? Who knows? Is it going to be a problem with a new Democrat administration? If that happens in the next 4, 8, or 12 years, probably not.
Can I ask you?
And I can add a little to that too. Like what we're going for right now, which language needs to change in the federal side of things. But if we got it back to local enforcement, then whenever you go to actually get an inspection sticker for your vehicle, if it doesn't pass the smog test, rather they set new thresholds for smog, whatever. But if it doesn't pass that test, then theoretically your vehicle would be illegal to drive from the get-go, which would eliminate a lot of the federal government having to deal with this if they could actually go back and deal with it like window tint, like inspection stickers, for example. And if it passes there, then great, you get to drive it. If not, and you got an inspection sticker and a cop pulls you over and your city, your state, takes that seriously, then you should get the ticket for it. That's what I would advocate for, or am advocating for more than anything, is let the states and local departments handle what's best for their place. But I do understand that takes new language, up at the top. So that's where Congress and Senate, they all have got to get involved and do it. But likewise, 200 signatures to get us there. And I don't think that's too out of reach, honestly.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Stewart, in regards to that? Is, say if we take the ATF and there's certain products that have been sold where I don't know if people ever caught felonies off of it, but they would visit individual people with a specific trigger that might have been an issue or whatever it might have been. So we've seen it happen individually with other departments. Is that just because of the scale? Like it's a much smaller scale to get, I don't know, say 5,000 particular widgets, away from people if it's in regards to, say, the ATF, whereas we're talking trucks probably in the millions where it's too big to enforce on?
I think it has to do with the nature of a firearm. I think that the scope might be relevant, but I think that for the ATFs, for their mandate, which is to regulate alcohol, tobacco, and firearms within the scope of what Congress provides, I think that what you see there is what they would consider to be more of a public safety issue than pollution. And probably they have an internal document or an internal mandate that says that they're going to focus on that, almost like a compliance initiative, right? Maybe 1 year it's triggers, every 4 years it changes. 4 years is triggers and suppressors. Another is, bump stocks and, whatever might be in the news at that time. But my gut, not knowing too much about the ATF and what they do, my gut would be that more has to do with a public safety issue than pollution does.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just curious about that.
Yeah.
This last one is for you, Kory. And this person asks, is there really not a loophole for race vehicles, farm vehicles, etc. And he expanded on that and said a lot of people believe, or there's this pervasive rumor, that there's some sort of loophole that exists for a race truck or something that's operating on a farm.
There's for a vehicle, for like a mobile source vehicle, like, like our pickups and stuff.
Yeah.
No, there's no loophole right now that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any loopholes. The only and really, even on the ag side, there's not necessarily. I don't think I can't get it inked well enough to that if I was someone that worked on tractors or did any of that stuff, that I would be comfortable enough to come out and perform a delete or get rid of the system and do the paperwork that it's a temporary override. There could be a loophole for that just because the language was written so broad, but it's, in my opinion, still very risky. As far as our pickups, I'm unaware of any loopholes in existence whatsoever. Now, to say there won't be one in the future, I don't know. But as of right now, I don't know.
Is it a real race truck?
Oh, for a real
race truck. Like,
yes,
not a race waiver race truck, but a real race truck that you're trailering to and from the track. Yes, there's a loophole. Like, you can do that.
Well, the loophole, though, it can't have a current loophole. If we got on just language, it can't have a reverse gear.
Right.
It can't have, so they have language for it, but the language is actually so outdated that race cars and pro mods now have reverse gears.
That's
For
right.
me, that whenever I was dealing with it, because I was heavy in the race car thing, I had to freaking sell my race car over this. They were telling me anything on the engine or anything that was once certified must have to stay the same way. So whenever I was,
that's Borla exhaust EPA finding. Okay, have you read that order?
No.
It's from a couple years ago. I want to say maybe 2022, and it is the EPA's magnum opus on what is actually. I'll send it to you, Kory.
Yeah.
What is actually like constitutes a race vehicle? What doesn't constitute a race vehicle? What the exceptions are and everything. There's no loophole. Like, look, if you have a genuine race vehicle that you're not driving on the road, even if it has a reverse gear, the EPA is not going to enforce on you.
Yeah.
If you have a vehicle that you're saying is a race vehicle and it's registered and you're driving it on the road or you're selling parts for it to drive on the road, you're going to get busted.
Right.
And that's that. I mean, but Kory's right. There is no loophole in the sense that your listener is referring to it, right? There's no race vehicle loophole that lets me sell 10,000 tunes next year for race vehicles. That doesn't exist. So Kory's 100% right about this. The loopholes that would be in consideration are, I mean, they are genuine like emergency vehicles, true race vehicles, farm equipment that is not operational that you need to temporarily modify. That stuff is like, I mean, nationwide over the course of an entire year, you might be talking about 2,000 vehicles a year. Total.
Yeah. And a lot of times people, I see it in the comments all the time and they're like, well, why don't you just go to Canada and open a company or do this and that? Dude, if I wanted to do that, I could have had that done years ago. I've been international for a long time. The thing is that's not a real loophole. Realistically, there's people in America that found out the hard way. That's still not a loophole. They will hold you responsible in America for the things that are shipped in America that you're dealing with. Yeah. So like the out of country loophole, I've seen a lot of citizens that are non-citizens that are selling here that downstream of them, the Americans got in trouble, but at the top, they still weren't able to touch them. Yeah. So if you're an American citizen, the next loophole, someone says, well, why don't you just team up with a company up there and then they own it? Like the very most basic low level thing ever that anyone could think of in their mom's basement. And they're like, okay, that's protected because I'm hands off. No, you're not. You're not hands off. You've got old text, old Facebook messages. You've got all the information they need to show you were involved with that getting here.
Yep, that's right.
So that's the loophole people ask me about probably almost daily. And Now it's addressed.
They're still enforcing on foreign companies too.
Oh, nice,
Yeah.
nice. So they're still hitting that.
They're still hitting that.
Oh.
The civil side. I'm aware of a couple new cases. So
Yeah.
you know,
They going after the company in the other country yet?
Mhm.
Okay, so that's new to me. I
I
didn't
don't
know
know.
that.
I don't know whether or not it's going to be effective
Right.
because in if we're talking about Canada, for example, there's a lot of Canadian companies. There has to be what's called dual illegality, so it has to be illegal in Canada and in the US for it to be
Okay.
contraband. And in a lot of areas of Canada, deletes are not illegal. Alberta, British Columbia, mostly in the Western Canada. But Canadian Parliament, which has gone way further left as we've gone further right, Canadian Parliament is supposed to be making a federalized delete rule. So
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't even know that. Okay.
yeah, and it's supposed to be coming out within the next like year. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but if that does happen, that is going to curtail a lot of behavior because the Canadians aren't worried about the impact of the American enforcement because it's not illegal in both places. So there's no extradition and there's no other material impact besides what they're selling. And that'd be a good one for future. I don't know how many of your listeners care about that, Patrick, but a podcast about like foreign influence in like American emissions would make for a pretty interesting podcast.
Yeah.
That would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Very cool, guys. Well, I know you guys are both really busy. I appreciate you taking the time to align your schedules today to talk about this. It was really insightful, one of my favorite podcasts. I appreciate the insights and the look at not just DEF, but emissions, how things are progressing to really kind of set the record straight. So thanks again, guys.
Absolutely. Happy to come on.
Same. Thanks for having me on.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code 20TD8 FR26 to get 20% off your order. Kershaw's got a whole lineup of knives to meet any budget that you might have, whether it's a new knife for EDC, hunting, fishing, something around the job site, around the house. They've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different handle designs, opening mechanisms, and you also get free shipping over $50. So we really appreciate them offering that discount code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters, Robert, John, TSW Diesel, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who follow us on social media. We appreciate all your support here in year 10 of the Diesel Podcast and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2026. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.